Hello and welcome to the Meet the Parents podcast.
Hi there, it's Tim here. Before we launch into this week's episode, this is just a little intro to explain that this is actually episode 55 of the Meet the Parents podcast, and not episode 54, as I'm just about to announce. That's because this episode was originally recorded the evening of the Manchester Arena bombing, after which we recorded an additional episode in response to that night. So that became episode 54, and so this, well, you can work out the rest. So anyway, a week later than planned, and now a little bit out of date, here's our discussion about slummy mummies. Take it away, me. Welcome to episode 54 of the Meet the Parents podcast, and another 30 minutes or so of chat from some of your favourite parent bloggers. I'm Tim from Slouching Towards Thatcham, and tonight I'm talking to Hannah from Budding Smiles and Mark from Best Dad I Can Be. Good evening, both of you.
Hello.
Hi, Tim. Good evening.
So, this week we're going to talk about slummy mummies and the strange phenomenon of solidarity. We all love the Mail Online, don't we? Without it, how would we get our regular words of wisdom from Katie Hopkins? Or be reminded how immigrants are the source of so many of the UK's problems, especially those who help staff the NHS, or drive our buses, or build our extensions. And of course, no month is complete without one of their journalists slamming bloggers, and in particular mummy bloggers. Now last week was no exception, as journalist and author Anna May Mangan laid into mummy bloggers Sarah Turner of the Unmumsy Mum, Katie Kirby of Hurrah for Gin, Steph Douglas of Don't Buy Her Flowers, and Clemmy Telford of Mother of All Lists. Now, in a piece entitled "Why Are So Many Women Boasting Their Slummy Mummies?", she asked, what should we make of modern-day mothers' gin-soaked shortcomings? She says that many indulge in ranting about their little ones on social media. She notes that others seem to be proud to post pictures of humorous punishments and quick-fix meals, and she claims to ask the four moaning mums their views on slummy mummies, although actually all she does is lift quotes from elsewhere, but why let a small thing like facts get in the way of a good story, eh? So, Hannah, what was your initial expectation before reading the article? And was the reality any better, worse, or different than what you expected?
A giant eye roll, to be honest. I don't necessarily, for starters, I can't stand gin, which probably immediately sets me outside of the sort of target audience of a lot of the bloggers who she was writing about. My initial expectation was, here we go again. It's a woman leaping on other women who are just doing their thing and getting through this whole crazy life of being a parent. And reading the article, I pretty much felt the same way. I'm so sick of this constant need to be pulling each other down all the time. I just don't think it's necessary. And yeah, so basically I read the article and it was about as ridiculous as I thought it was going to be.
Mark, I know you take a slightly different view to many people on this one, don't you? Because you do agree with parts of it at least, don't you? So, talk us through some of the points that Mangan makes that you think are, have some kind of validity and why you think that is.
I'm not sure, Tim, that it's necessarily agreeing with points that were made in the article, but I think once you move into the public sphere, you do become not a target, but you are a potential target for this type of article, particularly when the product you are selling, in inverted commas, is family life. We all know that the mail online or the mail itself, if you want publicity, it can be a fantastic publicity tool, but it will very quickly turn around and bite you if the journalists feel that they can get more mileage out of turning around and biting the hand that previously fed it. I don't necessarily agree with the points made, but I can understand how the points came to be made and how bloggers can be singled out or used for that type of article.
Yeah, and I guess with many of the kinds of the type of article that you often get on Mail Online, somewhere hidden beneath all the outrage, there is a grain of truth, even if it is twisted and exaggerated to a certain extent, isn't it? And I mean, I have to admit, I tend not to make a habit of clicking on Mail Online articles because, as you've alluded to, Mark, I know their method all too well. You adopt a deliberately outrageous position. It's all designed to serve as clickbait and to provoke social media outrage that in turn leads to more clicks and, for the Mail, more advertising revenue, which is what it's all about at the end of the day for them. And it's a tried and trusted formula. And to be fair, the Mail does it better than pretty much any other media outlet on the planet. So was the article what I thought it would be? Yeah, it pretty much lived down to my expectations. Although, as I say, behind all the really quite deliberate and calculated poking of the hornet's nest, there are a few points that have some, as I say, some kind of grain of truth there. And yeah, I'm sure we'll come back to a couple of those later on. But just to pick out some of the, I use the word highlights in quotes, of the article. Mangan talks about the rise of hyper-real parenting blogs as a reaction against the fake perfection of celebrity mummies. The kind of, the ones that plaster themselves all over Instagram or in those magazines that you find in hairdressers that I never read. And there is certainly some truth in that. She goes on to say in the article, and, I quote, "I appreciate how this honesty could make new mums feel less isolated and more reassured, and old-hand mums feel entertained. But there's the rub. In a way, these books are just as deceitful as the celebrity mothering myth they aim to puncture. Their target audience, mostly new mothers, is given the frankly dishonest message that bringing up a baby is nothing more than a pooey, pukey, wine or gin-drinking wheeze. In this dumbed-down world, you need no brainpower or compassion to be a mother, just a clock ticking down to your nightly wine o'clock, and I'd hazard a guess that the children of these resentful, gin-soaked mothers, who are in reality educated middle-class authors, are actually very well cared for, enjoy organic fruit and vegetables and sleep in clean pyjamas." That's a lot of accusations and assumptions crammed into a few short lines of text. So, first of all, do these kinds of blogs and books make new mums and dads feel less isolated? Now, I mean, Hannah, as we've talked about in the past, you've had some tough moments over the past few years. I mean, do you feel that you've been deceived at all, or has reading other mums' experiences had a more positive impact on you?
I have to admit, and maybe this isn't the response that would be expected, I don't know, I don't really enjoy either the perfectly curated Instagram lives or the hilarious, the gin. And I see why there's the audience and I see why they're very popular, but I've always been very much down the middle, and my own blog is very much down the middle. So if something's wonderful, I'll say it's wonderful, and if something's pretty horrendous, I'll say it's pretty horrendous. And most of the time it's all just very boringly normal, which is why I'm an exceptionally mediocre blogger with very mediocre statistics. and so I don't really go down either route. And in my experiences with the tough times that we've had specifically with Toby, but also with Martha, I mean, she projectile vomited over me 20 times a day for the first 6 or so months of her life. She also pooed all over me in the middle of our hotel restaurant where we were on holiday. So that was a particular highlight. But, I'll say about those things, but then I'll also be like, oh, she's so lovely, and, breastfeeding's going really well and whatever. So I've just never really found solidarity in either of the extremes of the blogging community or the blogging world and books and everything.
And Mark, does this kind of sort of blogs or writing appeal to you at all?
Yeah, I think perhaps taking a step back, Tim, there's a couple of things here. If I'm ever invited to speak about blogging, there's the one point which I make is that if you are too good to be true, which some blogs have been in the past, then I think you're too dull to be worth reading about. I do think it's the imperfections in life which make the story interesting. The other thing that I would say is that there's a salutary lesson here for people who think, okay, I'm going to start a blog and I'm going to write about my children, and that's wonderful, and it'll be great, and I'm going to be honest. And when you start a blog, and you will know this, Tim, from writing about your own children, you have got to decide, and you've got to be consistent about how much you are prepared to reveal. I've used this example before. The first time my eldest son came home drunk, it was really very, very funny, and I felt justified in writing about that. The first time my teenage daughter got seriously drunk, it was an absolutely horrendous experience, and the story will never, ever see the light of day. There's certain elements of family life that I'm not prepared to disclose, and you've got a duty to your children as well. So I think for what this story in the Mail and the controversy surrounding it does illustrate is that for parents who are contemplating writing about their family, they need to be aware that there are boundaries, and they need to set those boundaries at quite an early stage.
That's a really, really good point and a really good piece of advice. And, I would add to that as well, that if you are going to, put yourself out there and talk about you and your family and your lives on something as public as a blog or a book, or anything that potentially is in the public eye, you have to be willing to accept that not everyone is going to agree with you and not everyone is going to love you. For every 10 people who love everything you write, there will be a few who are genuinely just not interested, and a few who will actively disagree with you and dislike you. And do you know what? That's reality.
It absolutely is reality in writing, that you simply cannot please all the people all the time, and you can't even please all the people some of the time, probably. If you're pleasing some of the people some of the time, I think, as Stephen King says, you're probably doing quite a good job.
And, I think sometimes, again, as new bloggers, that's something that we're not necessarily always aware of. And the first time you get, a negative comment on the blog, or, a journalist picks up a quote and, deliberately skews it to fit whatever their particular narrative is, it is really hard not to take that personally. But, often it's not. It's someone who's merely trying to serve their own story. And you just happen to be a pawn in that game. You come back to the 4 bloggers in question here. Are Sarah, Katie, Clemmy and Steph and others like them, are they giving a quote, frankly dishonest message, unquote, or are they giving a rounded view of their lives, or is it are they somewhere in between, where, like any good writer, they exaggerate a little bit around the edges occasionally just to sharpen the narrative?
That's what I was just going to say. I think they've picked their sort of niche, if you like. They've gone down that route of the funny, the humour, and the real life parenting and the not so glamorous aspects of it. That's their niche. That's their target audience. And so I don't doubt that they sometimes exaggerate that, or, stage certain bits of it or whatever. So it's not necessarily being dishonest. It's maybe a slightly exaggerated version of the truth, or just picking out the bits of the truth that fit their style of blog and what their audiences want to see. And that's not always going to appeal to everybody. But if it appeals to the people that they're trying to appeal to, fair play to them.
I think that's an exactly the right comment. I think all of us that write on a regular basis about our families, that the children, I'll be entirely honest, in my writing, the children have all, because I've written about them for so long, they have all become characters. My wife has become a character. I have become a character. All of those characters are slight exaggerations on real life.
Oh, this is very dull, isn't it? All three of us
agree
on this point.
We're agreeing. Sorry, Tim.
Let's stop that immediately.
No, Mark, that's completely wrong, and everybody should just be completely 100% honest all the time.
Right. Well, in that case, I will honestly report on what's going on in the next bedroom, where regular listeners will now know that exam revision doesn't quite mean exam revision.
I can't disagree with both of you. I don't see that any of these four writers are doing anything that any good writer doesn't do with their characters. Are they telling us everything? No, of course they're not. If you think back to the time when they used to have 24-hour coverage of the Big Brother house, real life is mostly kind of dull and uneventful.
Let me ask a question there. Why are people chosen for the Big Brother house? Because by and large, they are larger than life characters, aren't they? Prone to doing interesting things.
And the type of characters that are going to clash and create drama and
And even then, 23 hours of their day is uneventful. And, you come back to what these guys are doing. And, are they focusing on things that readers will find entertaining and that they'll empathise with? And they're focusing less on the other stuff that, we know isn't that interesting? Of course they are. I mean, again, that's what good writers do. Are they being dishonest when they're being selective in what they show to us? No, I don't think so. If you read Sarah's or Katie's books, and you'll see that they don't focus purely on their epic fails, which is kind of what Mangan suggests in her article. They talk about wider issues. I mean, Sarah talks about her mother's early death and how that impacted her as a daughter and a mother. And yeah, they even talk about some of the positive stuff sometimes. And to me, they're no more misrepresenting the truth than, Mangan is in only tugging at one particular narrative thread in branding them dishonest and slummy and educated middle class. Where's the lie, really? Moving on. One point I thought that actually was quite well made by Mangan was when she highlighted the ridiculousness of some mums' claims in places like the forum discussions on Mumsnet, where there is a certain constituency of people who seem to clamber over themselves to make the most outrageous comments just to stand out from the crowd. Any thoughts or experiences on that from either of you?
I try to avoid those things as much as possible. Occasionally I've had the odd blog post on stuff like Mumsnet or Huffington Post or whatever, and the comments have been amusing to say the least, because people are very, very free with their words on the internet, and it is this very, very odd thing that people are either desperate to be the most perfect or the most horrendous, and it's like this constant keeping up with the Joneses. But it's, I guess, because it's all online now, we see, whereas it might have just been your next door neighbour, now because of forums and the such, it's your next door neighbour and several thousand other people all trying to keep up with the Joneses, and it does get quite ridiculous.
I've only ever read a Mumsnet forum once. I'm not sure how I stumbled across it, but the discussion was on which politician they would most like to have sex with, and I found it so terrifying that I fled from Mumsnet, and I've never really been back since.
To be fair to Mumsnet, and this undermines, I guess, Mangan's argument a little bit. This isn't just how it is on forums where mums are talking. It's just the nature of internet forums, which, in my experience, and I did spend a little bit of time in the past moderating forums for my sins. In my experience, they tend to attract one of three types of people: either people who genuinely want to chat and are seeking information, people who want to prove they're right about absolutely everything, and people who seek notoriety, who want to be seen as one of the forum's leading characters and consequently are quite happy to lead the race to the bottom of feeding children fish fingers straight from the freezer. If Mangan thinks that some of these slummy mummy style discussions are bad, A, she needs to explore the internet a bit more, and B, she should see what some of these people in the community think of dads. Let me highlight another quote from the article. So, Mangan says there are legions of bloggers, all in a battle to prove why they are the most slapdash mother, backed up by hilarious pictures of their half-dressed children on the school run, clutching sandwich bags of dry cereal to eat because mummy was too busy looking at Facebook to feed them a proper breakfast, which of course is a lie. We all know they're looking at Instagram, but does she have a point here?
I don't know. I don't think that there are legions of bloggers battling against one another to be the most outrageous or the most slapdash or whatever. I think there are a lot of bloggers who have audiences who appreciate the reality that Toby ate dry Weetabix for breakfast this morning, but that was because it was his choice, little strange child that he is. But I don't think it's any sort of competition within the blogging community in that respect. And I think that shows that she doesn't really necessarily get the blogging community, because I've certainly never seen anything in the private blogging groups on Facebook or whatever kind of at each other's throats about who's been the most outrageous in their most recent blog post. I think people are just sticking to their niche, and there might be quite a few people who are doing that funny, half-dressed, going to school in your slippers type blog, but that doesn't mean they're clambering over one another. I don't know. I don't really think she's got much of a point there. I just think they've got their niche, they found their audience, and they're running with it, and why not?
Everywhere you look, there is always going to be a constituency of people at both extremes. The people whose lives are absolutely perfect and the people who portray themselves as being absolutely terrible at everything. And then there's a very large majority that sits somewhere in that grey area in the middle. And it's a pretty wide expanse. And the point you made, Mark, earlier about the kind of people that get picked to go on a show like Big Brother or The Apprentice or any of these other reality TV shows that rely on, quotes, characters. Are these people representative of the great British public? No, they're not. They're picked for a reason, because they have a certain character type or a certain flaw. And these are the people who stand out and serve as characters. And I don't think for 1 minute that any viewer watches a programme like Big Brother and say, yeah, they've just picked 15 completely random people to be completely representative of the British population. They don't. They're not like that. They understand that you are picking extremes and that you are...
They're not going to pick us, are they? I mean, what should we do now, Tim? Well, I think I'll do a couple of hours writing. Well, I was going to do a couple of hours writing as well. It doesn't make for great television.
There go my hopes of ever sitting in the diary room. I think there is a little bit of a point there, but she's picking a very small minority. Are the kinds of people that she's talking about and accusing all bloggers of being, are they representative of the population as a whole? No, of course they're not. And and I think where the article really starts to fall down badly is where she tries to develop this picture of mummy bloggers as being all resentful and gin-soaked. Where does that come from? And why does she then go on to, in her words, hazard a guess about what their children eat or how they dress for bed? In what way does that count as insightful journalistic reportage? She's making assumptions purely to fit the narrative that she wants to tell. Hannah, how about you? Are you familiar with any of the four?
I've not actually met any of them. I have ordered from Steph's shop before and had a few message exchanges with her, but she seems perfectly lovely. And I'm not a regular reader of any of their blogs. I haven't got their books, I will admit, because I can't remember the last time I read a book, so I haven't been buying at all. But they all come across as being nice women, and their social media presence, they seem funny and they seem nice, and they're clearly very good writers, and they obviously do love their kids. Yes, they talk about the maybe less glamorous sides of parenthood, but from what I've seen of them on social media, it's obvious that they do look after their children. They're not neglecting them. There's none, and I didn't like the undertone within that article. Without her saying that they were neglecting them, there was this slight undertone that was the kind of conclusion she wanted us to come to, that they're not looking after their children and they're terrible mums that aren't feeding them properly, aren't bothering to wash them properly, and all the rest of it. And I just thought that was really distasteful, because one look at their blogs or their social media, you know that's not the case.
I do know Katie a little. In fact, the last time I spoke to her, a TV got broken, but that's a completely different story. But let me speak about Sarah, who I do know the best of the four. I mean, we've met in person a few times. I've interviewed her previously, and yeah, we regularly exchange banter on social media. Probably something that would have Mangan classify me as, I don't know, a baddie daddy or something. I'd consider myself in a position to judge probably better than Mangan, who, as far as I know, has never met her. Yes, Sarah is middle class. She got a really good degree. Pre-kid, she worked for one of the major banks. No, she doesn't consider herself to be a slummy mummy, just an imperfect one with a real flair for bringing her experiences to life with a large dollop of A, self-awareness, and B, self-deprecation. And yeah, she is absolutely 100% genuine. I've spent enough time with her to know that she is in real life exactly as you find her on the page. She's happy to speak out. She's sometimes disarmingly honest, and still a little bit bemused at what's happened with the whole writing thing. And and this is where the Mail article falls down the most for me. As journalism goes, Mangan resorts to cliched, judgmental presumptions about people she's never met. And it's a bit like me reading her article and noting the title of her parenting book, The Pushy Mother, and hazarding a guess that she's a bitter hack who resents the success enjoyed by these new blogging upstarts. But I'm not going to accuse her of that. I don't like her article, and I think that's probably fairly clear, but I'm not going to condemn her on the evidence of a single op-ed piece written for a site that demands over-the-top viewpoints. And it's a shame, really, because Mangan is a serious writer, unlike certain other people I could mention whose names rhyme with Katie Hopkins. In fact, Mangan is best remembered, well, by me at least, for burning Katie Hopkins a few years back on ITV's This Morning. So you might remember this is when she was ranting about supposedly lower class parents who give their children names such as Chardonnay. Yes. Mangan was a guest on the show that day, and she turned round to Katie Hopkins and called her an insufferable snob. Now, if you were to judge her based just on that one example, you couldn't be blamed for thinking she's a bit of a hero. So, what is she? Is she hero? Is she villain? Is she something in between? All depends on the narrative. Having said all this, it does seem to me that many journalists do have a bit of a bee in their bonnet when it comes to bloggers. We haven't done the years of hard graft. We're all educated middle-class softies who are just in it for the freebies. We can't write properly like what proper journalists do.
Oh, stop there. You just stop there. Writing skill, journalists are the most overrated people around. Right, with one or two exceptions, most journalists can't write their way out of a paper bag. There are a great many bloggers who are far better writers than journalists. And I think, I'm going to have a rant. This is quite entertaining. I haven't felt one coming on for ages. I absolutely believe that. I'm fed up of people saying to me, he can write really well. He used to be a journalist. Puh. I honestly, there's far more writing quality in the blogging world than there is in the journalism world now. And I think journalists also, one of the things they don't like about bloggers is we have freedom to write about whatever we want to. The only editor of my blog is me.
I think there is this big thing at the moment. I saw it on recently. There was a bit of a hoo-ha on a freelancing group on Facebook between journalists and who were slating bloggers. And I do think that we have got their backs up a little bit, and there is this big sort of them and us thing going on. And I agree with Mark, because we're not heavily edited, there is this rise in the popularity of blogging and bloggers because we can say it how it is. And I think when people, certainly when I've been looking for answers to certain things, be it from parenting to politics, I tend to be drawn in a lot of situations more to a blogger's viewpoint than a journalist, because I feel like a journalist is being held back or restricted by the needs of their editor and their publication, whereas a blogger can just write it and present it as they see it, and I can sort of formulate my own opinion a lot better based on that, because it seems a lot more free. And I do think that journalists are not particularly happy with the rise of bloggers, and this is a very generalized thing to say. but also I don't think there is a competition. I don't think any blogger would turn around and say that they are attempting to take the place of a journalist.
I do, to a certain extent, understand why some journalists feel so defensive about bloggers. You know, there are some bloggers who are absolutely brilliant writers, and there are also some bloggers who don't know the difference between there as in not here, there as in there are, and there as in the possessive pronoun. But as with anything, there is a spectrum of quality. You know, there are some great bloggers, there's some terrible bloggers, there are some great journalists, there are some terrible journalists. You know, there are those of us who think that not all journalists are A.A. Gill when it comes to trumpeting the quality of their own writing and, you know, what often seems to be something of a holier-than-thou attitude. I kind of agree with you, Mark. I wouldn't say that the number of journalists out there in the UK who I consider great they're certainly a small minority. You know, there are some terrific ones, and there are some absolutely god-awful ones. Just because a blogger hasn't trodden the Fleet Street beat for 30 years doesn't mean they can't be a good writer too. Experience and training, yes, they do absolutely count for something, but they don't necessarily equate to talent.
No, they don't. They don't. And what they very often equate to is a standard voice which they apply to every subject. I think one of the great things about bloggers is that you see some of the better bloggers able to write in several different styles, which I don't think you get with too many journalists. No,
I think that's very true, and it comes back to the whole thing around the freedom. You are your own editor. You are not wedded to a particular tone of voice or a political stance or an editorial guideline. You can do whatever you want. The response to this article, not surprisingly, was quite vehement in some quarters, and as parents around the country rallied to support what Mangan branded the dimwit narcissists, the Daily Mirror was quick to pick up the cause and actually talk to 3 of the 4 bloggers in question to get their actual views rather than manipulating second-hand quotes. So they spoke to Steph, Katie and Clemmy, and they got them to present their side of the story. So any thoughts on how the Mirror reacted to the Mail piece?
I think they were very clever, to be honest. I think they did. They saw the hype and they sided with what social media was doing by actually approaching those bloggers directly. I do think it was quite clever, which pains me to say somewhat, but they rolled with the consensus on social media and they got the views of those bloggers, and I think they did well to pick it up quickly and actually get Steph and Katie and Clemmy to talk directly to them rather than it just being a presumptuous piece of opinion.
And of course it was a great opportunity to have a little dig at the rival, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
One final footnote then before we close. So one of the barbs in Mangan's article referenced a mother, I think it was on the Mumsnet forum, who supposedly boasted of feeding her child a fish finger straight from the freezer. And while I giggled as parents took to Instagram and Facebook posting photos of plates of fish fingers, I had to chuckle when I saw a couple of posts made by Birdseye on their Facebook page, where they took the stance of standing behind mums everywhere and even using the adopted hashtag solidarity, as in solidarity with TEA at the end. As a marketer, I take my hat off to what was a fantastic piece of opportunism, as well as it was a nice way of showing support, and that's for all the issues sometimes that social media creates. It can also create that sense of support and community, and it was nice to see a brand take a stand like that, even if it was obviously something that benefited themselves. I should leave the final word to Sarah, the unmumsy mum, who wasn't interviewed by the Mirror, but she did retort via her blog: if taking snaps of fish fingers, cursing the bastard stray Lego impaling my feet in the middle of the night, and offering a virtual hug to mums who are having a shitty day is wrong, then shoot me down, because I don't want to be right. And that for me really encapsulates why the likes of Sarah and Katie and Steph and Clemmy are much loved by hundreds of thousands of loyal followers. It's not being slummy that makes them popular. It's just the fact that they're bloody good at what they do. So before we go, what have we all been up to recently? Mark?
Well, trying to get the book finished still, which is now due out in the middle of June. And this afternoon, Jeremy Corbyn was giving a speech about 5 minutes away from my office. So being a bit of a politics nerd, I wandered down to listen to the leader of the Labour Party.
Hannah, what about you? What have you been up to?
Well, I've not seen any real-life politicians speaking. I've seen a real-life Tim speaking at Blog On in Manchester yesterday. No, I spent about 7.5 hours on the road for a 6-hour Blog On conference, but it was well worth it. So that's pretty much been the main thing of my week, really. And Martha's had a few settling in sessions to get her ready to start nursery in 2 weeks' time. I start my new job 2 weeks today. So, yeah, if you come back to me in a couple of weeks' time, I possibly won't be able to put a coherent sentence together because I'll be so flipping exhausted, but I'll have had an awful lot going on.
And as for me, as Hannah's just said, this last week really has been about Blog On, which was held at Manchester's Museum of Science and Industry. It's my third time, actually, at a Blog On event, and like last time, I was presenting a session on this occasion on how to promote and advertise blogs on social media. And for me, it's a great way to give something back to the blogging community by sharing some of my own knowledge and expertise, and to include GIFs in my presentations. Gotta love the GIFs. And that's it for another episode of the Meet the Parents podcast. We'll be back next week, but in the meantime, here's where you can find the three of us online. Hannah?
I'm at buddingsmiles.co.uk and on all social media at buddingsmiles.
And Mark?
Twitter, you can find me at bestdadicanbe, the website bestdadicanbe.com, and the author website for the book, markrichards.co.uk.
And finally, you can find me at slouchingtowardsThatcham.com and across most social media as at ThatchamDad. You can download this podcast on iTunes and on Android devices, on our website at meettheparentspodcast.com, and via a variety of podcasting apps. If you don't already, do please follow us on Twitter at ParentsPodcast and Facebook at facebook.com/meettheparentspodcast. So anyway, thanks for listening, and do please join us again next week. Good night.